call the Honourable Louise Upson.
E te mana whakawā, e te whānau o te Paramata o Aotearoa. Tēnei aku mihi mahana ki a tātou katoa. I roto e te wiki o te reo Māori, kia ora hui tātou katoa. Mr Chair, I'm delighted to stand and speak in this estimates debate and outline some of the work of Land Information New Zealand for the 2016-17 year. Land Information is one of those portfolios, Mr Chair, that is fascinating in its breadth and scope of the work that it undertakes. So whether it's charting the ocean floor, whether it's the maps that we use on to get around the country, or some of the more interesting technical work they're doing currently with both elevation data and things like LiDAR. So as Mr Chair, I thought I would just take a few moments to talk about some of the quite innovative and not just life-changing work that Land Information does, because Land Information's work is important not just to us as a country economically, it's becoming increasingly important in terms of our protection from threatening earthquakes and flood incidents, for example, with the data that they have. So I thought I would just use the time to outline some of the work and focus for the year ahead. Mr Chair, one of them is the vertical datum. So LINZ has completed a 5-year project to improve our datum, which is a reference for measuring the height of land and its features. So as a result of this work, both planners and surveyors and engineers now have a consistent reference for measuring heights accurate to 3 centimetres. So in terms of flood risk, which Mr Chair, I'm sure the House will accept that that is a challenge that we're facing in the years ahead, makes it easier for local authorities to share information about risk and ensure that vital infrastructure can be managed. The LiDAR program and the LiDAR data is 3-dimensional information. So this is work again that central government is doing in partnership with local government that makes it more effective and more efficient for all of our citizens. And it will help us to respond more quickly to natural disasters such as flooding, but also can look at greater productivity in forestry and agriculture, which is of course incredibly important to those across the primary industries. And Mr Chair, we know how important primary industries is to New Zealand. We know how important it will be if we look at the 50,000 new jobs expected in the sector between now and the year 2025. Using data, using evidence to inform decisions and to enable businesses to grow up and down this country is fundamental. Mr Chair, I wanted to talk about some of the other areas that Land Information is involved with. One of them is clearly around pest management. So in this budget, one of the areas of focus for the government is in wilding conifer control, and Land Information is a contributing partner in that work, as well as those of you who, for work or play, access our lakes. Weed control is another aspect that Land Information will continue to work in. But those are the kind of nuts and bolts things of Land Information. The area that I think has the greatest opportunity to transform our country's economy is in the vital work that Land Information does in open data. So hopefully some of you will have come along to the Open Data Showcase that we held here in Parliament. And this is greater use and access of public data to enable three domains really. The first domain is greater decision making, both in local council and in central government. It also enables the greater level of data that is shared across the country, greater participation and engagement with civil society, which I think is a fundamental part of making our country work better. The third aspect of open data is the opportunity it creates for new businesses and businesses to crop up and grow. And Mr Chair, just recently I had an example, or had the opportunity to visit one of those companies that displayed here in Parliament, a company called Tandem. And they also have an office in Europe, in Sweden, and do work across the European Union. So, Mr Chair, I'm really proud of the focus and the funding that we invest in Land Information in open data, It's a critical part of how we grow our country, how, Mr Chair,
Louise Upson.
how we enable citizens to participate through civil society, and how to ensure that our decision-making is based on good data. An example of that, Mr Chair, is the aggregate data that Land Information collects and provides to the Inland Revenue Department every time any property in New Zealand is sold. So whether that's a house, whether it's a bare section, whether it's a commercial property or a farm, every single transaction, we collect the Inland Revenue number, we collect data associated with the tax residency when that property transaction occurs. And Mr Chair, 3%. In the first 6 months, 3% of every single transaction for property was associated with a person who had an overseas tax residency. So this data is really important in terms of informing future housing policy. So although, Mr Chair, we've only got the first 6 months so far, the next quarter will be due out later this month. My firm belief is at the end of the 12 months of the first collection, that is hard evidence and hard data that our government will be using to drive greater decision-making, greater policy around housing. So this is a government that's not just plucking names or figures out of the air. We will make our decisions based on hard data. Mr Speaker, I did also want to touch on one of the other areas that is, of course, important to New Zealand, and that is, of course, smart cities technology. This is another area that is perhaps quite invisible to the general public in terms of the important work that Land Information do. So this is the ability to have sensing technologies that are used in partnership with local government to monitor things like water quality, to monitor traffic and pedestrian movements, actually to look at hazards in cities, whether it is people who are living on the streets, whether it is people who are causing trouble in particular areas that cause a safety issue for members of the community. And it's a project that LINZ is leading in association with Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch City Councils that really is transformative in terms of the ability to use real-time data to react and provide assistance and support and to make decisions. Mr Chair, the final aspect that I do want to touch on is the Overseas Investment Office. Our government is very clear that foreign investment is critical in terms of growing our economy. There wouldn't be a member in this House who couldn't look at an example in their own area where a business has changed hands or been supported, new technology has come into their neighbourhood and the creation of jobs. Mr Chair, I will also want to put on record that unfortunately in some cases these transactions aren't just about the creation of new jobs, but in some cases they save jobs. So some of the transactions that come before the Overseas Investment Office, we have situations that if the application wasn't approved, that could mean the loss of 100, 200, 300 jobs in a local community. But I'm clear, Mr Chair, that the way the applications work, it is 23 criteria that the Overseas Office consider in terms of whether or not this application or this proposal would benefit New Zealanders. And that's the key part of it. There has to be a substantial and identifiable benefit to New Zealand, whether it's a business changing hands of over $100 million. In some cases, they are part of a multinational global transaction, of which New Zealand is a small bit part player. In other instances, it's the opportunity to introduce technology to New Zealand that otherwise wouldn't be here. So the Overseas Investment Office, in the fees review that came into effect just on the 4th of July, means there'll be a significant increase in the resources for the office. Because one of the things, if you've got a potential overseas investor who wants to buy a business, 6 months is really too long. In some cases, what's happening, those investors are going to Australia or elsewhere. And that, Mr Chair, does not help New Zealanders, does not help the opportunity for more New Zealanders to gain employment and to gain new technology and benefits for New Zealand. So, Mr Chair, that is important work that the office is leading.
Mr Chair.
Call Eugenie Sage.